So the reason why we are here today is that we're hoping to share some critical information and ask Philanthropy through its partners to support what we see as a very critical partnership for communities. It's a partnership effort that we believe directs financial, policy, training, and resources to ensure that grassroots organizations are able to protect and maintain the progress in towards racial equity. And so I want to thank all of you once again for being here with us. We are a multiracial coalition, and we recognize an important need to fully resource our public schools across the country. Our agenda this afternoon is fairly tight because we want to hear from some very key voices that are leading this work in philanthropy, in grassroots organizations, as well as our initiative partners. And so with that, I am going to be quiet and introduce this afternoon Dr. Ghislaine Gunu, who is the interim president and CEO of the Nellie Mae Education Foundation. Ghislaine?
Thank you so much, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. And it's so amazing, and I feel so humbled to be a part of this really powerful community. I really appreciated all those introductions, and I'm reminded that I am because we all are, and that's why we're here. And for those of you who do not know me, I'm Ghislaine Gunu. I'm the interim president and CEO of the Nellie Mae Education Foundation, where we are committed to championing efforts to prioritize goals that communities have to challenge racial inequities and to really move forward a more just and equitable public education ecosystem, particularly in the New England region. And as we all know, we are all here today due to the continued attacks on our democracy and on public education at large, as it relates to teaching the truth, as it relates to acknowledging the truth of the real history of America and implementing just and equitable policies that impact young people, educators, and communities across our country. And we as funders are in a unique position to work in partnership with one another and with community stakeholders in this fight to preserve and to transform our public education ecosystem for good and for justice, right? I'm gonna take us to just one example and shout out to all of our co-conspirators and organizers and leaders from New Hampshire in the room right now, because New Hampshire continues to be what some might call ground zero in the anti-critical race theory fight, particularly in the Northeast. And there's legislation that bans the teaching of anything having to do with race, gender, and other identity characteristics in schools. And currently there are bills and laws being pushed so that teachers cannot teach quote unquote negative accounts and divisive content of our nation's history, and where the meaning of an adequate education is being redefined to center a Western worldview that does not recognize the needs and the identities of all of our young people. So we at the Nellie Mae Education Foundation have been attempting to use the power, the privilege, and the resources that we are entrusted with to speak out, to amplify, and to fund efforts to dismantle these attacks on public education. And our efforts in New Hampshire in particular look like writing open letters and testimonies and providing resources to amazing organizations such as New Hampshire Listens, Reaching Higher in New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, the Endowment for Health, and the efforts, that our convener, the Schott Foundation here, has been leading across the country and in parts of the New England region. And it's important to also mention that, we've been really intentional in taking steps to move some campaigns like the Teach Us Everything campaign that lifted the voices of young people in our region. And in working with our board of directors to really grow a shared understanding of the critical times that we are in. So there is so much to this fight. And as we are all gathered here, it's really imperative, right, that we seize this moment and take collaborative actions to manifest equity and justice and truth telling, and in stopping the fight against public education and quite frankly, the fight against democracy at large, because we know that those fights are linked. And the Schott Foundation has a long history of working on these issues. You know, we are honored to hold shared values. And it is with that in mind that I and many of my colleagues are in this space today. It's also important to mention that the partners that are present in this initiative, namely the Metro Center and Race Forward, have also demonstrated their commitment and have decades of experience fighting for racial justice and a multiracial democracy. So this work is truly for the long haul. It's now my pleasure to introduce my dear friend, sister, and colleague, Zakia Ansari. Zakia is the brilliant and phenomenal advocacy director of the New York State Alliance for Quality Education. Zakia is a mother and grandmother and has dedicated more than 20 years of her life fighting for educational justice and ending the oppression of Black and Brown communities. Her very impressive body of work includes co-initiating the National Grassroots Movement, Journey for Justice, an alliance of grassroots community-based organizations from across the United States. And she is a proud board member at the Schott Foundation and sits on the steering committee for the Women's March. So please join me in welcoming Zakia Ansari, who will continue to lead us in this conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Hi, everyone. I want to kick off by offering a land acknowledgement from the stolen land of the Munsee, Lenape, and Lakawe people here in Long Island. I am a grandmother, a mother of 8, a grandmother of 4, and have been doing community justice, educational justice work for about 21 years. My children have all graduated from the New York City public schools, and now I have grandchildren, so the next generation has started. My organization that I work for is called the Alliance for Quality Education, and we are this leading statewide advocacy group in New York. And I actually started as a parent volunteer with the organization 14 years ago, actually more than that. I'll be working 14 years for them, probably like 15 to 16 years before I started working there, and started as a parent leader. And I think I just want to share that bit of a story and that struggle for the last 21 years to get educational justice, but also the victory and inspiration I hope you will find in the fact that with the support of a funder like Schott Foundation, who was our first funder and our longest funder, Dr. John Jackson, who's on here, I heard him say this once, they made a $15 million investment in us for a $4 billion return for millions of children, right, in New York State. And what that looks like is after almost 21-year battle as AQE for a campaign, an equity lawsuit called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, last year, in the midst of a racial reckoning of the streets, a global pandemic, and just so much trauma happening around the world, and in this country, we were able to actually win that victory, a historic victory of almost $4 billion. But we could not have done that without the longevity and the belief from Schott and other funders here, and who might not be here, and the people on the ground, right? The parents and community members for the last 20 years who trusted us, who stood side by side with us, who went to Albany with us, who just shared our stories and who shared their stories. We could not have done that without all those collective things. This attack on what we're seeing now, the truth, on our democracy, on voting rights, on LGBTQIA rights, is not new. I've been doing this for 21 years, but it is something different that's happening right now. And it takes a different response that we need to collectively come together. There are folks out there who have tried to privatize public education before, and now they have found a new way under the guise of critical race theory. What they really are attacking, though, is the other CRT, which is culturally responsive teaching. And we are saying no more. And we are here today to collectively pull together because we believe that a multiracial democracy requires an investment, not just of dollars, but of commitment, of compassion, of hope, inspiration, and love. We are seeing parents talk about book bannings. We've all saw that. In New York City alone, we had someone who says they want a human education. Y'all define what that looks like for me. Something tells me it's not centered in racial justice. We are also seeing attack on so many things that so many organizers have done over the last few years. The victories that we have won around culturally responsive and sustaining education, around restorative justice practices that young people have fought for so many years, social emotional learning supports. We have won really major things on the ground across this country. And all those things right now in this moment, in this short, brief moment, are at stake of being rolled back and causing more harm and trauma to those very communities who fought so hard and passionately and committed to and dedicated to getting what was right for our children. And so we're here today to really push back against critical race theory, to share and talk about the truth is not something we are willing to give up. We are not willing to give up democracy. And we need to reinforce to the ground why all these organizations, Schott, Metro Center, Race Forward, we are leading this effort. Schott leads our regranting work and funded education like this briefing. Metro Center leads our partnerships, research, and policy analysis, as well as providing strategic support and coaching to leaders and organizers. Race Forward also provides support and coaching, as well as leads a national engagement and narrative strategy to individual supporters. We are doing it all. We're in the right place at the right time to do this, and we need all of you to commit funding to actually ensure that happens, right? Because we have the collective brain trust to make sure that it does. We have the victories on our side. We have the commitment and compassion on our side, and the other side is flooding the system with dollars that really are causing more harm than good. And so what I would like to do now is turn it over and briefly introduce James Haslam is a senior fellow and campaign director for Race Forward's Heal Together initiative, and my friend, longtime co-conspirator in this struggle. Megan Hester is the director of the Education Justice Research and Organizing Collaborative at the NYU Metro Center. And so Megan, please share some more about this current landscape, because a lot of the words I know I use are actually under attack, like racial justice, equity, and so much more. So I'm going to pass it to my friend, Megan Hester.
Great. Thank you, Zakia. I'm really glad to be here, and thank you all for being here with us today. And let's pull up the slides, and I'm going to give you guys the 5-minute version of what is happening out there with the attacks on critical race theory. So here we have this beautiful map that lays out some of the legislative actions that are happening across the country. So as of last week, 37 states have introduced some sort of classroom censorship or anti-CRT legislation in K-12 schools. 16 states have passed a bill, and 30 states have legislation currently pending. Some of them have multiple legislations pending. Missouri has 19 bills currently pending. Illinois, I believe, has about 11. So this is kind of the landscape. We're also seeing an increase in the number of legislative attacks as well as the severity. So since the beginning of January, there's been an average of 3 classroom censorship bills introduced every day. There also are there's more of them that are including a mandatory penalty now, which a lot of the 2021 bills did not have. So a lot of them now have a private right of action. So individuals, parents, or community members can sue schools or individual teachers. A lot of the legislation mandates states to withhold funding for districts that are found in violation. And a lot of this legislation also includes fines on individual educators, up to $10,000, per violation, as well as termination and disciplinary action. We're also seeing this year a 4-fold increase in the number of school board member recall efforts happening. So these attacks on what they are calling critical race theory, which we know is not actual critical race theory, but this umbrella term that's being used. It's very live, it's very active, it's not dying down, it's in fact increasing in intensity. So let's look at what's actually under attack. So if you could go to the next slide, we'll show that, as we know, the term critical race theory is being used as an umbrella term to encompass really any conversations around race, gender, sexuality that make somebody uncomfortable, right? So this is a list of terms that are considered to be red flags for, this is from a toolkit from an anti-CRT advocacy group called the Center for Renewing America. So I highlighted just a couple of them, but you can look through this list here, cultural awareness, equity, protecting vulnerable communities, multiculturalism, land acknowledgement, that these are the things that are being labeled as problematic and as red flags. And so as what they're calling critical race theory is getting banned, all of these things are being endangered, not only in the states where there are legislative attacks, but even in the states where there is not pending legislation. Because people are scared. People are scared that if they teach any of these things, if they promote any of these things in their school districts, the attacks are coming for them. So where are these attacks concentrated? We can hit this next slide. Interestingly, this is from a wonderful report from UCLA IDEA called the Conflicts Campaign. I'll drop the link in the chat in a little bit. The attacks are focused not in the most conservative districts and not in the most liberal districts, but in fact, in the swing districts. So those that are shifting to more liberal or more conservative, or that are politically contested. They're also happening, if you could go to the next slide, in the school districts that are experiencing the most rapid demographic change. Specifically, the districts where the percentage of white student enrollment has fallen by more than 18% in the past 20 years. In those rapid change districts, they're more than 3 times as likely to face attacks on critical race theory. And more than 7 in 10 of all of the impacted districts, this is also from that conflict campaign report, experienced at least a 10% drop in white enrollment in the past 20 years. So you can see it's that, really where you have these really shifting, politically contested districts, demographically shifting districts, that's where we're seeing the bulk of these, of this conflict. And that makes sense because really what we're experiencing here is a white racial backlash against changing demographics, right? And this is showing up in so many ways. This is showing up in the Charlottesville protest, in the replacement theory protest, in the riots that we've seen in different locations, where we've seen the insurrection January 6th, in the voter suppression efforts, right? In the wake of George Floyd's murder, we saw these widespread multiracial protests, including in mostly white and conservative communities, and a real increased consciousness around racial inequities. And that accelerated the significant progress that had already been made by communities organizing for racial equity over decades, right? And winning anti-racist policies on a whole range of issues. And we know from history about white backlashes. We know from, if we look historically, right, after Reconstruction, after the Civil Rights Movement, after the Obama presidency, we know that white backlashes are brutal and that they can be long lasting, and that the policies that they usher in are incredibly devastating. And so we are taking this very seriously. And we know that we need to bring everything we can to this moment to stop this legislation, and also to push back and to continue to advance the pro-equity, anti-racist policies that have been moving forward in school districts for the past few decades. And the additional piece of political context to give is just that white backlashes often have a political and electoral angle. And in this case, it does as well, right? The 2022 midterm elections are just around the corner. And this is a play to mobilize a racially anxious base to flip Congress, to come out and vote and flip Congress. And then additionally, sort of a third dynamic, as H.E.A.L mentioned earlier, is that this is a play for further privatization of public schools, that it's generating this sense that public schools have failed us, that they're dangerous, that they've betrayed us, and that to get combined with the hardships of remote schooling that families are coming off of, really encouraging parents to pull their kids out of public schools. And a lot of the legislation does that. So there's like a Virginia bill that if a school is found in violation of the bill, the parents are automatically eligible for vouchers from that school. There's also a Missouri law that says that when any fine money that is collected from districts or teachers, 80% of it goes directly into a fund for private and charter schools. So a lot of this legislation directly connects the attacks on CRT with a push for privatization measures. So there is some good news though, if you go to the next slide. When we organize, we can win. We are just currently being out organized. So these are just a couple of examples of headlines from across the country from just the last few months. We've got Wisconsin, Nevada, Texas, Alaska, Connecticut on here, and I could have done, many dozens more. That these are efforts not just to stop the anti-CRT legislation, but actually to advance anti-racist policies, because the public is actually on our side in many many school districts. And where people are organizing, we see new multiracial coalitions coming together. We see new individuals and organizations forming alliances to fight against book bans, against classroom censorship, for anti-racist policies, for culturally responsive education, and they are often winning. And this is possible. And so I'm going to pass it to James now to talk about how can we invest in a ground game? What does our ground game look like so that we can see more of these wins happening?
Thank you so much, Megan. Thanks everyone for coming today to hear about this important work. I'm super excited to be working with Race Forward on this Heal Together initiative, which we started because we saw the power of organizing and telling our stories in these fights. And this is a way for us to be able to unite our communities during these culture wars. Because we believe, as Megan said, that if we get out and organize, that and everything that we've seen has been true to this, is that the majority of people actually support honest, accurate, and fully funded public education. The question is, can we out organize the manufactured culture wars that we're up against? Before coming to Race Forward, I was working with a group I had started in Vermont and New Hampshire, which last year found itself, as we've heard a bit already, at the front lines of fighting this culture war with the divisive concepts legislation, and seeing these school boards across the rural and suburban communities, start up to erupt in division. In this slide here, you see on the left a rally outside of the New Hampshire governor's office, right when groups, huge coalitions of groups working to organize, to mobilize, to try to stop that legislation. Now they're in the midst of fighting that new bills in this legislative session. Also on this slide is news stories from where I live in Essex, Vermont, which in Vermont, the media at the time were calling my community ground zero for this new public school culture war. And one of the things it did is it fired me up, because this is where my kids go, but it also showed how parents, students, educators can come together to unite the community and be able to win. The parents and students organized and mobilized at one point. In a 5-day span, they went out and got 1,200 signatures on a petition that they had on the counter at local toy store and local bookstores, and ended up bringing more than 200 people to school board meetings that usually get 5 or 6 people to come. And in June, they passed an equity plan, despite all kinds of anti-CRT people coming out to those meetings. They passed it 8-1, and now they're working to implement that plan. And one of the leaders of that effort is now running for school board. We are thrilled to be able to work in this effort to help support school district-centered organizing and education justice work across the states, and to partner with Metro and Schott on this. We think there's an incredible opportunity to build a multiracial democracy by investing in our school district organizing. We can go to the next slide. This is one of the most exciting things to me about this partnership. This is not only going to be getting funding out to organizing groups that are doing this work, but also providing technical support and really partnering with the groups doing this work on the school district level, on a regional level, and on the statewide campaigns. So as you can see here, this is going to include a toolkit of resources that we'll provide to groups, both the organizing groups and then volunteers that want to put together campaigns. We'll have a national training series. We'll have convenings and other organized groups like leadership cohorts for student leaders. We'll have strategic support in coaching and research for the campaigns. And we'll also have narrative and cultural strategies. This is an area, we can go to the next slide, which Race Forward is super excited to work with our partners on this, to put out our narratives and counter what we're up against. So this is a list of our narratives, but what we're up against is the things that we hear all the time in the news about how talking about race is inherently divisive. The slogan of the Moms for Liberty group that, when we said to talk about division, we meant math, and that we should be colorblind when it comes to solving issues of race. We're also up against just the idea that systemic racism is a myth and that racism is solely about hate in one's heart. We're up against a long time idea of rugged individualism and a lack of hard work and personal responsibility as a primary driver of racial inequities. We're also up against the idea of a zero-sum game, that white people will be victims when we talk about race and address systemic racism in any meaningful way, and that in this case, white families will lose ground. And we're up against the idea of woke ideology is the primary source of division. And as people put in the chat, some of this legislation is now being called the Stop Woke Act. So our narratives, freedom to learn. We all deserve an honest, accurate, and fully funded education. Where we are going to be able to overcome the politics of division, where certain politicians are using a caricature of critical race theory to rob us of our history and knowledge and to solve some of our biggest challenges, and that systemic racism is real. We're going to talk about a solidarity dividend and unity, where addressing the harmful impacts of systemic racism actually benefits all families. And we're going to talk about public purpose. We all have a stake in stewarding public systems that we all rely upon to live, work, play, and become members of society. And we're also going to have our narrative around courage over fear, that there's more that unites us that divides us. So last piece around our approach is we have a 3-tiered approach. A tier 1 is where we're partnering with local groups who are leading campaigns with dedicated staff, working with students, parents, educators, and community. We have a tier 2 approach where we have school district campaigns that are led by volunteers. So they might not have staff yet that are being able to support them, but there's parents, there's students, there's educators, and other community leaders that are working to organize in their communities. And then we are also engaging with individuals. So this is a tier 3 of support for people who have not necessarily started to organize in their communities yet, but support what we're doing. And this is also part of our strategy to get out the victories and the voices from the tier 1 and tier 2 campaigns. So we can start telling a different story about parents, students, and educators uniting and being able to raise expectations about what's possible, and hopefully inspiring these individuals to start a campaign so tier 3 folks can become tier 2, and those tier 2 campaigns can get traction, get resources, and become tier 1. And so with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Michael to talk about the Schott Foundation's role in this.
Thank you, James. Thank you very much. Can we have the next slide? So Schott is involved in this, and our basic grant making strategy is being brought to bear largely because of the history of the Schott Foundation. For nearly 30 years, we have been working in this space, working particularly close with grassroots organizations and doing everything we can to elevate and amplify that particular voice. Next slide, please. When we got together as a partnership and we decided to put out a request to organizations for funding that wanted to work on this issue, we honestly expected that we would hear back from probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 10, maybe 12 organizations. We received applications from over 40 organizations from across the country, signaling to us that this was a very, very serious issue, but more importantly, that organizations and families and communities across the country were clamoring for support and for an opportunity to respond in a coordinated, organized, and resource supportive fashion to push back against what they all really saw as an attack on a quality of life, ultimately an attack on democracy. Next slide, please. So through the Schott Foundation's Opportunity to Learn network, where we are directly connected to a wide variety of organizations across the country, 4 national alliances, over 300 organizations, grassroots partners from across the country representing about 32 states. What we recognized very early on was that in order to make headway, supportive headway in this fight, it was very necessary, again, to provide resource support to those grassroots organizations that are on the front lines of this issue, that are dealing with a variety of quality of life issues, housing, education, employment, any number of things that are actually touched on and are just beneath the surface of this veneer around CRT. But providing those organizations with the opportunity and the resources to stand up and push back in an effective fashion, we recognize was going to be very, very important. And indeed, that is the way Schott has always operated. Next slide. The piece that I think, and that most of us think is particularly important to draw your attention to this afternoon, is that as we think about the importance of supporting groups that are trying to advance racial justice in our society as a key component of democracy, unfortunately, what we see is that the philanthropic outlay in the racial justice space over the last several years has unfortunately not kept pace with efforts to roll back the clock or roll back history. You heard one of my colleagues earlier talk about the fact that in many respects, we are being out-organized and out-funded. When we look at just a brief period of between 2017 and 2019, of the total of $14 billion that philanthropy poured into the space of organizations trying to do this work, racial justice only accounted for about 8% of that total outlay. And what that again represents to us, that when we think about education justice, when we think about the very kinds of issues that we are trying to combat against right now, it's critically important that philanthropy step forward and do a lot more. These organizations cannot win this fight on their own. They need our support, and they need our involvement. I'm going to stop there and pass this to Letha Muhammad. And the reason I want to pass it to Letha Muhammad is because for all of us who are involved in this fight, we sort of see the importance of looking not only at technical assistance and the provision thereof to organizations, but also very directly centering lived experience. Letha Muhammad is the executive director of the Education Justice Alliance in North Carolina. She brings to this space an enormous history of working on these issues. Like Zakiya, she is a mother, so she has important lived experience as with children who are in the public school system. And we just thought it was important to ask Letha to share a little bit about what that centering looks like in her neck of the woods from the perspective of the Education Justice Alliance. Letha.
Hey, thanks, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. First and foremost, Michael stole my first line, but I'm gonna say it anyway, because I never start a talk without like centering who I am. And I'm a Black mother of Black children. I have 2 daughters who've already matriculated through the K through 12 space. And my last one left is this 15-year-old boy child of mine who does not like 10th grade right now. And I have a 5-month-old grandson. So I'm in this for the long haul. I've been doing education organizing for over 10 years, and I helped found my organization, Education Justice Alliance. We're also part of the Dignity in Schools campaign, which is a national coalition of grassroots community-based organizations just like mine, who are rooted in community. We in particular in North Carolina, I have to say North Carolina, I have to say the South, have to recognize that we're organizing in the Southern context, and how the South goes oftentimes impacts everywhere else in this country. We organize explicitly, exclusively with Black and Brown working class parents and students, recognizing that inequity, unfortunately, is something that has always been a part of the formation of public schools, and that you have to have an organized body of folks who are willing to push back, which, this current iteration of attacks on public education that my colleagues so wonderfully laid out earlier, really centers why it's important to invest in organizations like mine. I can say shout out to some of my funders who I see, at the table, who funded us for many years, the Communities for Just and Fair School Fund. Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate that investment. And this is really an invitation for all of you all who aren't already invested in this fight to invest in the winning side. One thing I want to highlight in North Carolina, we had legislation last year, anti-CRT legislation, that was introduced and passed, right? And it was passed because we have a Republican-controlled legislature. But there was groups like mine, other organizers, other community groups that weren't going to let that legislation just be passed and that's it. We organized ourselves. We organized writing and calling campaigns to our governor to push him to veto that particular legislation, and he did. So we count that as a victory, but we also know that one victory doesn't win the war, and this is a war, right? When we talk about these attacks, we have to really talk about the for real collateral damage, and the collateral damage is young people. Like the very people that we're supposed to care about, who we're supposed to invest in as a society, these folks on the other side are saying, I'm willing to throw them away. We have a lieutenant governor just Monday made recommendations to our new House committee on the future of public education. Black man at this, who came before this body of white men to give his recommendations. And his recommendations were rooted in anti-Black racism, in the notion or these racial tropes about who Black children are, who working class families are. He recommended, more expulsions for kids. He named that the problem was fathers weren't in the home, or that young people just don't want to do the right thing, without a real foundation about the crises that we find ourselves in now as a result of a global pandemic. So the notion that we can open up schools and go back to business as usual without there being collateral damage as a result of this pandemic that shows up in the ways in which not only young people enter school buildings, but the adults in the building as well, is a foolish notion. It's a lie. And so the work we're doing in North Carolina is directly rooted in dismantling that lie and holding folks accountable. But if we don't get invested in, if philanthropy isn't willing to look at the grassroots community-based organizations who have less resources, I'm a staff of one full-time person with 3 part-time organizers on my staff, and we do phenomenal work with less. But what would we be able to do if we had more? When I think about this current attack, I also know that there is an eye being turned to school boards. That's the latest frontier of dismantling power, of moving people out of the way. I actually work and live in the largest school district in North Carolina. We're somewhere around the 13th to 15th largest district in the country. It fluctuates. We're a powerful district. We were the first district in our state to have an Office of Equity, mind you, on the backs of the work that me and other parents like me did to push our district. But we have parents showing up now, right? Saying we don't want equity, dismantle this office. This is a waste of money. We have more rural districts that we know don't have the same kind of support that we have in larger cities. This fund, this current iteration, the support that Race Forward and the NYU Metro Center will be providing us through this grant opportunity will allow us to reach have a further reach, right? To get out of our own area and connect with more rural parts of the country to help, or not country, the state, to help our parents and students there put up a fight, because we know Proud Boys are showing up at our school board meetings, wreaking havoc. And we know that education is a game changer in young people's lives. And we have to invest in the future for young people. So I'll stop there. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this. I believe in this work, but I'm happy to pass the mic over and introduce Kent McGuire, who's the Program Director of Education at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. And one thing I'd like to, lift up, right, is you all may be wondering, what does Hewlett have to do with this initiative? Why are they supporting this initiative? So I'm gonna turn it over to Kent to share why he thinks this is an important initiative to support. Thank you.
Letha, thank you. And I'm I'm happy to be here. I see a lot of friends of mine in the Zoom. Can't name them all. It'll just get me in trouble. But let me answer your question. First of all, let me just say I actually think this is really something that funders are thinking about, not just Hewlett. From the various conversations I've been in, Letha, I know there's a strong interest in supporting efforts that advance racial equity, but also questions about what's needed and about what's doable. How do we handle the reputational risk that might be associated with our support? What's actually possible? I hope that this session that we're in is actually tackling some of those questions, head on. At Hewlett, we struggled with all of them. I can remember distinctly a board meeting last July in which a couple of my colleagues on the board put their hands up and saying, I think we're on the right side of this issue, but can we actually do anything, about it? Here's where we came out. First, we have an institutional commitment to kind of equitable and effective public education. And we didn't think we could pursue that ambition without focusing on racial justice. Second, we have an institutional commitment to a strong democracy. We have a democracy program. We see education in the public schools as a key to a viable democracy. So we didn't think we could just sit on the sidelines in the face of all these efforts to undermine confidence in our schools. And of course, not everybody knows this, but we're the deeper learning folks. We want kids with agency, kids who know who they are and who are ready to shape their own futures. And that simply isn't possible if they can't access their own intellectual heritage as a part of the educational opportunities that they have. So we concluded that we did need to bring resources, yes, to curriculum and professional learning, so we could have some influence over what kids have an opportunity to learn. Yes, new ways of assessing learning so that we have a better way of acknowledging what they learn and acknowledging race, culture, identity, and the like in the context of that, but also to advocacy and organizing to create more demand for the policies and practices that we actually want to see in schools and districts. We put a little money into litigation. We put a little money into narrative change. We put a little money into communication. So we have a multifaceted game plan here. But like you, like the other funders here on the Zoom, we all have strategies, and I'm not here to ask you to abandon them. Rather, I'm just suggesting that we're unlikely to make the progress we seek on any of those things if we don't also find ways to come together around these issues of race and culture and identity. I hope this is a time when we can compare notes, get these questions about what's possible answered, and then find ways to support efforts to fend off these attacks on teaching controversial subjects and all the like. And frankly, the more of us that get involved, the greater the tools and tactics that can be brought to bear in this moment, and the more we can spread the risk. I spent 8 years, Letha, in the South before coming out to this unique place called the Bay Area, right? And I know only too well what you mean by, small shops having to fight battles on multiple fronts with very limited resources in a part of the country where what happens will shape the nation's future, whether we believe it or not. So I think if there was ever a time to figure out how to rally around people like you. We're in it. And I think I get to turn the floor to Zakia. Is that right? Great.
I
That's
think
what
it's
I'm
Michael,
gonna do.
but it's okay, Michael, go ahead. Is it you? I can just do it. Just give me a thumbs
Let
up.
me-
I got you.
Let me just quickly say this. I am going to call on you, Zakia, but what I'm going to do is we are rapidly running out of time. So when I was in college, there was a saying, it was a hip hop saying, we would always say, when are we going to get to the good part or the real part? So I want to move us to the real part because we are running out of time. And I want to ask Zakia to step in and just make a couple of comments about where we are and what we need.
Okay, I've been waiting for this just like all of you. We are grown people and we know why you all are here. We are happy to see you. So here it is. We need to raise at least $5 million before the summer in order to get grassroots partners on board and roll out this organizing plan of a multiracial democracy in this moment. I hope it was clear based on what we put out there. Besides routing and bank account numbers, what do you need from us to make a financial commitment to invest in a sustained, unapologetic, multiracial democracy movement? We have raised $1 million so far, and we are aiming to resource 40 grassroots groups and need to support, provide technical assistance, and to implement our communication strategy. And so the ask is there. I also want to thank the funders who helped launch this effort, Hewlett, Rakes, Schusterman, and Nellie Mae also. So that is the ask. If it's not clear, let me know. I could add some more zeros to the number, whatever it makes you feel comfortable.
Thank you, Zakia. So we have only a few minutes left, and I don't want to take up all of your time, but I do want to ask or allow for maybe one or two questions if there are any. Because we are running out of time, we are going to take all of the questions that have come in, and we're going to get answers back to everyone in writing in a sort of a group response. But if there are questions, perhaps one or two that we can take, and I can invite one of our colleagues to respond, I'd love to be able to do that right now. One question that I do see is whether or not we could say anything about sort of trans state campaigns that we're seeing and how they might operate. Let me invite anyone to take that on if they like. Megan, anyone?
I'm gonna pass that one to James.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I mean, I think what we mean there is essentially, you know, with trans state, or sometimes we actually use translocal, is how we connect these struggles across the country and lift up the stories to weave together a different story about our country and our communities than we're hearing in the mainstream media.
Yeah, and I would just
question.
add,
Go ahead.
Mike, I'll just add 30 seconds to that, just to add, you know, I think that we are also interested to see whether federal policy demands come together out of bringing together organizing groups across districts and across states, that there may be places where what communities want, what they're prioritizing, require some federal action, some federal policies, federal funding, whatever that is. And so we are, you know, interested in exploring that as well, bringing together people across states to make demands at the federal level they wouldn't be able to make individually.
Zakia, quick question for you. Could you talk about your most successful strategies in engaging parents in active participation?
Wow, in 2 minutes, that's what you give me? All right. I mean, I think what we always know is that you meet parents where they are, and not everyone is in the school building. And sometimes you just got to get into the community and actually reach folks. We depend too much on schools to be, if we don't see parents there, then something must be wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean something must be wrong. It could be a lot of things going on. And so how do we find ways to really connect and find parents where they are? And then find out what they need. Sometimes we go after them because we need something from them. We want to extract. And it's exhausting to be extracting from folks all the time. So I think when you are able to encounter parents where they're at and actually listen and hear them. It doesn't mean one meeting, it doesn't mean one time, it might not even mean 5 times, it may mean multiple times. Then you get a sense of building trust. And that is the core of a lot of how you continue to get folks, leaders, et cetera, to engage. It's like trust. I need to trust that what I share with you, you care about hearing, and that you're not just trying to be extractive.
Yeah. Folks, I want to thank you all very much again for spending this afternoon with us. If you would like more information about how to support this effort, I want to invite you to be in touch with my colleague, Lauren Hadi. There you go. Excellent timing. And she will be able to answer any of your questions around support. As we close, I do want to quickly call on my tribal ancestors. Whenever people gather and we are of one mind, we have a saying, and I think it's apropos to use at this time, as I thank all of you for being here with us this afternoon. And that saying is Abremu. So thank you all again for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the afternoon. Stay in solidarity. Bye-bye.
You're going to begin a short survey. Please fill it out. Y'all all know how important surveys are. Please, it's going to be short. It won't take a lot of time. So we're going to hit click, and there's it in the chat. You can open it up right now if you want. Thank you, everyone.